The alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, and Alara Calloway opened her eyes to the same ceiling she had been staring at for 14 months. The same water stain in the corner above the window, the same diagonal crack running across the plaster like a scar that had never quite healed. The same pale gray light coming through curtains that had never been the right size for that particular window curtains she had bought at a discount store 3 weeks after moving in because she needed something on the glass and could not afford to care what it looked like. She lay still for a moment, just a moment. That was all she ever allowed herself. Then the baby kicked. He kicked every morning at this hour, as reliable as the alarm, as if he already understood that the world required you to get up and face it, whether you felt ready or not. She put her hand on her belly and felt him move beneath her palm, that strange rolling pressure that still surprised her every single time, even now at 7 months, even after weeks of feeling it. It still felt like a miracle. It still felt like something she had not fully earned and could not entirely believe was real. She sat up slowly, one hand braced against the mattress, the other still resting on her stomach. The movement cost her something. Everything cost her something these days. Her lower back had been a source of constant low-grade protest for 6 weeks, and her ankles by the end of a shift swelled inside her shoes until the leather felt like a constraint rather than footwear. She had learned to ignore both. She had learned to ignore a great many things over the past 14 months, and the list had only grown longer. On the nightstand beside the bed sat a framed photograph. Her wedding day, June 14th, 2011. She was 23 in that photograph, wearing a simple white dress she had found at a bridal shop in Nashville after trying on 7 others and deciding that simple was what she wanted. That simple was what felt true. She was holding a small bouquet of white daisies because she had always loved daisies more than roses, and standing beside her was Marcus Calloway in his dress blues. 25 years old, dark hair cut short and neat, jaw set with the particular effort of a man trying to look composed, eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was trying not to smile too wide and failing anyway. She touched the frame with 2 fingers. Just 2 fingers lightly, the way you touch something you are afraid of wearing down by touching it too often. It had been a ritual since the morning after the funeral, when she had placed the photograph on the nightstand and understood that this was where it would live, now that she would see it first thing every morning for as long as she remained in this apartment, and maybe longer. Marcus had been gone for 14 months. She made herself look away from the photograph and toward the kitchen counter on the other side of the small studio where a stack of mail sat beside the coffee maker. She did not need to open most of it to know what it said. She had read enough of it already. She knew the numbers by heart the way you come to know any recurring bad news. The eviction notice was on top. White envelope, official letterhead, the kind of document that looked bureaucratic and impersonal and landed in your chest like a dropped stone regardless. $1,400 in back rent. 2 months. The landlord had been patient, and then he had become less patient, and now she had 10 days. Beside it was a bill from the fertility clinic. $8,200. Outstanding balance. Payment plan options available. Please remit within 30 days to avoid collection proceedings. She looked at that bill for a moment longer than she looked at the eviction notice because the bill carried a different weight entirely. The eviction notice was a problem with a number attached to it. The fertility bill was a consequence of a choice, and the choice had been the most important thing she had ever done. The baby inside her was Marcus's child. Conceived 7 months ago through in vitro fertilization using sperm, he had frozen before his second deployment to Iraq in 2007. It was something they had talked about on a quiet evening in their living room before he shipped out, sitting on the couch with the television off and the lamp throwing warm light across the room, and Marcus had said it the way he said everything practical and difficult, plainly without drama, looking at her steadily. Just in case. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's what they taught us, Alara. And if something does happen, I want you to have a choice. I want you to have something of us. She had not fully understood the weight of it at the time. She had understood enough to agree enough to go with him and sign the paperwork enough to be present in the way you are present for things you hope will never matter. The full forward-looking gravity of what he was preparing for had not settled into her until June 15th of last year, when a deputy sheriff knocked on the door of their house at 7 in the evening and told her that Marcus had been killed on Route 43 11 miles outside of Millhaven, Tennessee, by a drunk driver who walked away from the collision with a broken arm, and a 5-year sentence that felt to everyone who had known Marcus Calloway like arithmetic performed on the wrong scale. For 7 months after that, she had moved through the world like a person only partially present in it. Working at the diner, coming home, sitting in rooms that still held faint traces of him. The particular way he had arranged his things on the bathroom counter, the smell of his jacket on the hook by the door, wondering what the point of any forward motion was. Not suicidal, nothing so directed, just untethered. Just adrift in a life that had been designed for two and now had to function as one. And then one morning in January, she had remembered the conversation on the couch. She had remembered the clinic and the paperwork and the words Marcus had said with that quiet certainty of his, and something had shifted in her chest, a seam coming open, warmth moving through where cold had been. She called the clinic that same morning. The procedure cost $12,000. She had $3,000 in savings. The clinic offered a payment plan. She signed without hesitating for a single moment, because some decisions do not require deliberation once you understand what they are. 2 weeks later, the test came back positive. She was still paying for it. She would be paying for it for a long time. And she did not regret a single dollar of what she owed. She got dressed slowly in the way that 7 months of pregnancy required everything to be done slowly, whether you had the patience for it or not. The Harlow's Diner uniform black pants that no longer fit the way they were designed to fit the waistband rolled down beneath her belly and held in place by a combination of geometry and stubbornness. White button-down shirt stretched across her midsection. Comfortable shoes that had once been comfortable and now simply hurt less than any alternative she had found. She lifted Marcus's dog tags from the nightstand before she left. Sergeant Marcus J. Calloway, USMC. 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. O positive. No religious preference. The medal was warm from sitting on the nightstand through the night, which always surprised her slightly, as if it held heat the way living things held heat. She put them around her neck, tucked them beneath her collar, and felt the familiar weight of them settle against her sternum. Another ritual, in some ways the more important one. The walk to Harlow's Diner took 12 minutes on a good day and 14 on the hard ones. This was a hard one. The August morning was already warm at 5:50, the air thick and still in the way that meant the day would be genuinely hot by noon, the kind of August heat that pressed down on everything in Millhaven and made ordinary tasks feel slightly more effortful than they needed to be. The town was beautiful in the early morning in almost every other way. Quiet streets, old trees throwing long shadows across the sidewalk houses, with front porches where people sat in the evenings and waved at neighbors they had known for decades. Millhaven, Tennessee had managed to stay something like itself through all the years and all the pressures that tried to change small towns, and in the mornings before the heat arrived and the day got complicated, you could feel that quality in the air. She arrived at 5:55. Rose Keating was already inside, moving behind the counter with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this particular thing for 32 years and had long since stopped thinking consciously about most of it. 70 years old, short gray hair, hands that knew where everything was, without looking, a face that carried the particular kind of quiet authority that comes not from demanding respect, but from having earned it in small increments over a very long time. She had been running Harlow's Diner since before Alara was born, and she knew every regular by name and usual order and preferred table and the thing they never ordered but always seemed to want. "Morning, honey," Rose said without looking up from the coffee setup. Alara tied her apron. "Morning, Miss Rose." Then Rose looked up the way she always looked up at Alara, a longer look than she gave most people, taking in more than just the surface. She saw the darkness under Alara's eyes. The careful way she moved through the space, deliberate and measured as if conserving something. The slight tension across her shoulders that had been there for months and never fully released. You didn't have to come in this early, Rose said. I know, Alara said, but I'm here. It was the same conversation they had been having in one form or another for several weeks. Rose knew about the eviction notice. She knew about the fertility bills. She knew that Alara was running on a deficit that went deeper than money. And she also knew that Alara Calloway was too proud to accept charity and too stubborn to stop moving forward, even when forward was difficult. So she handed her the coffee pot and let her work, because sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for a person is trust them to understand their own needs. The morning rush came in at 6:30 and stayed until 9. Construction crews, factory workers from the plant on the edge of town, truckers coming off Route 9, who had learned over years that Harlow's was worth the detour. Ilara moved between tables with the practiced economy of someone who had been waitressing for 8 years, taking orders without writing them down, refilling coffee before it was asked for, carrying plates with the balance of a woman who had learned long ago how to hold multiple things steady at once. If her back ached with every step, she did not show it. If the swelling in her ankles had started by 8 o'clock, she did not mention it. She smiled at every table. Not a performance, not something put on for the purpose of the job, but a real thing. The kind of smile that comes from genuinely liking people, from being curious about them, from understanding that everyone who walks through a diner door is carrying something they did not come to talk about, and that the least you can do is meet them with warmth regardless. That was who Alara Calloway was underneath everything that had happened to her. That was the part that 14 months of grief and financial pressure and bone-deep exhaustion had not managed to reach. By 11:30, the morning crowd had thinned to a handful of late arrivals. Alara was refilling salt shakers at the counter, her movements automatic, her mind briefly quiet in the way it sometimes went quiet during repetitive work when she glanced toward the corner booth. The big one. The one that seated 8, comfortably positioned where the afternoon light came through the wide window at an angle that made everything inside it look warmer and more settled than the rest of the room. It was empty now, waiting for the lunch rush. But she paused when she saw it the way she always paused when she saw it, because that booth held a memory that had not dimmed at all in 4 years. April of 2020. She had been working the evening shift when Marcus came in wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, nervous in a way she had never seen him nervous before, because Marcus was not a man who showed nerves. He was a man who kept things inside him until he was certain about them, and then he said them plainly. He had asked if she wanted to sit with him on her break. She said yes. He ordered 2 slices of apple pie. When hers arrived, there was a ring sitting on top of the whipped cream, a simple silver band with a small round diamond that caught the light at exactly the right angle. And Marcus had looked across the table at her and said, I'm not good with speeches, Alara, but I love you and I want to spend whatever time we get making sure you know that. Will you marry me? She had said yes before he finished the sentence. She was still standing with one hand resting on the edge of that booth, barely aware she had moved toward it when Rose came to stand beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. He was a good man, Rose said finally. Her voice was quiet. The best, Alara said. The word came out smaller than she had intended. Rose put her hand briefly on Alara's arm, a gesture that said everything it needed to say without requiring any elaboration, and then walked back to the counter. Alara took a breath. There were tables to serve and bills to pay and a child to bring into this world, and none of those things were going to happen on their own. She went back to work. At 12:05, she heard the motorcycles. The sound rolled into Millhaven from Route 9, the way certain sounds announce themselves before they arrive, deep and rhythmic, 6 distinct engines in loose formation, the kind of sound that registers in the chest as much as the ears. Through the wide front windows of Harlow's diner, Alara watched them pull into the parking lot and felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere that motorcycle arrivals sometimes produced in diners. Not alarm, not hostility, just a brief recalibration, the room adjusting to new information and deciding how to receive it. The bikes were Harleys, mostly, with one Indian among them, all of them well maintained in the way that distinguished serious riders from hobbyists. Chrome caught the midday sun. The riders dismounted with the unhurried ease of men who had been on the road long enough to have stopped performing anything for anyone. They stretched road-stiff muscles without self-consciousness and moved toward the entrance in a loose group. Their leather vests bore the same patch on the back: Iron Ridge MC, Nashville chapter. A mountain ridge against a rising sun, the kind of design that communicated something earned rather than chosen. Alara had served motorcycle club riders before. Millhaven sat on Route 9, a corridor that drew long-distance riders on weekends and through the summer months, and she had learned over 8 years that the reputation of MC members in diners bore little resemblance to the reality. Most of them were quiet, respectful, left decent tips, and had no interest whatsoever in causing trouble. They wanted what everyone wanted in a diner: food, coffee, a table an hour off their feet. These 6 looked like that sort. The one in front was the oldest, and he was the one she noticed first. Not because he was the largest, because he was not, but because he moved differently from the others. There was a quality of stillness in his movement, as if he had long since stopped needing to announce himself with his body. He was perhaps 60, perhaps older, with gray at his temples, and a face shaped by weather and by other things, the kind of face that had looked at hard things and not looked away, and carried what that cost in its lines without complaint. He scanned the diner as he came through the door, a single, unhurried sweep that took in everything and registered all of it, and then he led the group toward the large corner booth in the back. The same booth where Marcus had proposed. They settled in with the ease of men who had been doing this kind of thing together for a long time, the natural geometry of a group that knew its own rhythms. 6 men in the natural order established itself before anyone spoke a word. Alara collected menus and walked over. "Afternoon, gentlemen," she said, setting the menus down. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" The older man in the center looked up at her. His eyes were gray-blue, clear and direct in a way that was attentive without being invasive. They took in her name tag, her face, her condition in a single, unhurried glance. "Coffee would be great, ma'am," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, roughened at the edges in a way that came from years rather than from damage. "Black for all of us, if that's all right." "Coming right up." She brought the pot and 6 mugs and poured. As she worked, she was aware in a peripheral way that the older man was watching her. Not in the way that made the back of her neck tighten, not the way some men watched women who were just trying to do their jobs. This was different. This was the watching of someone who was noticing something specific and filing it carefully, not yet sure what to do with what he saw. She finished pouring and stepped back. "I'll give you a few minutes with the menus." "Thank you, ma'am." She returned to her other tables. The 6 bikers ordered when she came back efficiently and without complication, burgers, mostly the meatloaf, special coffee refills. They ate without making a production of anything, talked in voices that did not carry beyond their table. Just 6 men having lunch after a long morning on the road, nothing more. But the older one kept watching her. Not constantly, not with any quality that demanded attention. The way you watch something when you are not entirely certain you are watching, when the observation is happening beneath a level of deliberate choice. Every few minutes his gaze would find her as she moved between tables. He noticed the way her hand went to the small of her back when she turned from a table and thought no one was looking. He noticed the way she drew a breath before approaching each new customer, a small gathering of herself. The kind of preparation so practiced it had become invisible to most people in the room. He noticed the slight unevenness in her hands when she carried the heavy coffee pot on her third pass through the lunch crowd. And he noticed the dog tags, a flash of metal at her neckline when she leaned forward to refill a water glass. Military-issue chain, the kind he had worn himself for 2 tours, the kind you did not forget the look of once you had worn it. He leaned over to the youngest rider in the booth, a man in his late 20s named Tanner Briggs, with sharp, observant eyes and the watchful quality of someone trained to absorb information quickly and quietly. He said something in a voice too low to carry beyond the 2 of them. Tanner glanced at Alara, then back. He nodded once slowly. Alara did not notice. She was focused entirely on getting through to the other side of her shift. At 12:45, the black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. The diner did not go quiet when Victor Driscoll walked through the door. It went careful. Alara had learned the difference over the months she had been working. He learned to hear it in the room's frequency, conversations that continued but shifted pitch slightly, laughter that became a degree more deliberate, the adjustment that spaces make when someone enters them who carries a gravity that demands acknowledgement, whether or not acknowledgement is freely offered. Victor Driscoll was 54 years old, well-built in the way of a man who had been athletic in his youth and maintained enough of it to remain physically imposing. The suit was charcoal gray, the cut expensive, without announcing itself the kind of clothing that communicated serious money through understatement. Silver hair swept back from a face that might have been called handsome in a younger decade and had since settled into something harder, the features rearranged over time into the configuration of a man whose assessments went unchallenged as a matter of course. He walked in with two men behind him, younger also suited, carrying themselves with the particular stillness of people whose professional function included standing nearby and projecting a kind of ambient seriousness. Victor chose a booth near the center of the room. Before he sat down, he did something that Alara caught from across the room. He looked at the space with the specific attentiveness of an owner surveying a property, not a customer considering where to sit, an owner checking on an asset. He took his time with it unhurried, and then he sat. Rose came out from behind the counter herself, moving with the tight professional smile of a woman performing a courtesy she had not chosen. She had been managing Victor Driscoll's presence in her diner for 5 years, ever since he had purchased the building and begun collecting what he called rent, and what Rose privately called something else entirely. $800 a month paid without discussion, because the alternative had been made clear in ways that did not require explicit statement. Victor ordered without looking at the menu. Steak medium rare, side salad, iced tea. Rose wrote it down and walked back to the kitchen with her jaw set. Alara knew who Victor Driscoll was. Everyone in Millhaven knew who he was, in the way small towns always know their dangerous men, not through any single explicit revelation, but through the accumulated pressure of implication, through the way conversations changed register when his name came up and then resumed in different directions, through the stories that circulated quietly and stopped short of anything quotable. He ran 3 businesses that appeared in the county's legitimate commercial registry: a car dealership, a property management company with holdings across 3 counties, and a logistics firm that moved freight between Nashville and Knoxville. He ran other things that did not appear on any license, and most people in Millhaven understood this without requiring the specifics. 5 years ago, he had purchased the building that housed Harlow's Diner. The transaction had been presented as straightforward commercial real estate and had not been straightforward in any of the ways that mattered. 3 weeks before this Wednesday, Alara had learned something Rose had known for some time and carried alone. Victor also owned the building where Alara's apartment was. The ownership ran through an LLC, through the kind of layered structure designed to make it difficult to trace. But it traced back to him. It had always traced back to him, and now she had 10 days to find $1,400, or she would be standing on a sidewalk with everything she owned. Rose came from the kitchen, caught Alara's eye, gave the small nod that meant it was her section. Alara took one quiet breath, arranged her expression, and walked to his table. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, placing his silverware precisely. "Your steak will be out shortly. Can I get you anything else to start?" Victor looked up at her. There was a quality to the way he looked at people that was not rudeness exactly, or not only rudeness. It was the look of a person who had organized the world into things of value and things without it, and who was constantly processing new information through that sorting mechanism. His eyes moved across her face, her name tag, her belly in a sequence that felt deliberate. "You're new," he said. "I've been here 8 months, sir." He smiled. It was a complete social performance with nothing genuine behind it, deployed with the accuracy of long practice. 8 months. And how far along are you? The question landed before she was fully ready for it, the kind of invasive inquiry that relies for its power on the target's inability to object without seeming difficult. 7 months, she said, keeping her voice level. He tilted his head slightly. "Husband around." The words hit the bruise directly. She felt the familiar compression in her chest, the grief that lived just beneath the surface of every ordinary moment, always present, always ready to expand if she let it. 14 months of practice, absorbing hits like this one. She used all of it now. He passed away, she said quietly. 14 months ago. Victor nodded slowly with the nod of a man filing information rather than acknowledging loss. Shame, he said. That same smile. Something cold settled in Alara's stomach. Not grief, something different. The particular cold that comes from recognizing that a person has found a pressure point and is noting it with interest. I'll check on your order, she said in turn. She walked back to the counter with her spine straight and her hands still. Rose was watching from the kitchen window. Her face was tight. You okay, honey? I'm fine, Alara said. It was the only answer that kept her moving forward. In the corner booth, Cole Hargrove had heard every word. The acoustics of Harlow's diner moved sound in specific ways, and the corner booth had a clear line through the room that carried conversation with unusual fidelity. Cole had been in enough spaces to understand how sound moved through them. He had heard the questions, the pauses, and the word shame delivered with that precise calibration of cruelty. He set his coffee cup down without sound. Across from him, Tanner Briggs had gone completely still. His hands were flat on the table. His jaw was set. Cole looked at him, a single-level look, not yet. Tanner settled back, but his eyes stayed on Victor Driscoll's table. Cole had been writing for 40 years. He had been president of the Iron Ridge Nashville chapter for 15 of them. He had done 2 tours in Iraq, come home carrying things that never fully went down, and spent the years since in the ongoing work of learning how to live with what he carried without letting it turn him into someone he did not want to be. He had known men like Victor Driscoll in places far less comfortable than a Tennessee diner men who used power the way other people use tools, casually, efficiently, without particular thought for what they were working on. He watched Alara reassemble her composure as she crossed back to the counter. The way she put the expression back in place before she reached the next table. The way she gathered herself for each new interaction with that small breath and setting of the shoulders that she had been performing all afternoon without knowing anyone was watching closely enough to see it. And he saw the dog tags catch the light at her collar. He had noticed them when she first came to take their order. Military issue, the chain, unmistakable, once you had worn one yourself. He could not read the name from across the room, but he had been watching the way she moved all afternoon, the particular quality of a person carrying a weight that the people around her could not see, and something about it had been familiar to him in a way that went beyond observation. He had worn that look himself. He knew what it cost. Over the next 40 minutes, Victor Driscoll did what men who have decided a target is safe. He moved methodically through the available territory, testing each boundary, calibrating his pressure. The steak came back the first time overdone, he said. Rose took it back to the kitchen. The cook, a man named Eddie who had worked the Harlow's grill for 11 years, looked at the steak and said there was nothing wrong with it. Rose told him to make another. The second steak arrived 10 minutes later. Victor cut into it, chewed, shook his head. Underdone now. Alara stood at the edge of his table holding the plate. She understood what this was. She had encountered versions of this performance before and recognized its grammar. The food was not the point. The food was the territory being used to map something else entirely. I'll have Eddie cook you a new one, sir, she said. You do that, sweetheart, Victor said. She carried the plate back to the kitchen, and when the third steak came out, she brought it to the table with a level expression and set it down without comment. Victor cut into it, chewed slowly, and nodded. Better, he said. See, that wasn't hard. His 2 companions produced the expected smiles. Alara stood with her hands clasped and waited. Victor looked up at her. You know, sweetheart, you really should smile more. You've got a pretty face when you're not looking so serious all the time. The other customers kept eating, kept talking. The room had that careful quality again, conversations continuing at a slightly adjusted register. The sound of people who are aware something is happening and have calculated that engaging with it costs more than looking away. Is there anything else I can get you, sir? That's all for now. She walked away, head up, back straight, hands steady at her sides. From the corner booth, Cole watched her go. He saw the slight tightening around her eyes that she permitted herself when she was facing away from Victor's table and believed no one consequential was watching. He saw the way she smoothed her expression before she turned back to the room, pulling everything flat and controlled the practiced performance of a woman who had decided long ago that showing the crack was the most dangerous thing she could do. He knew that calculation. He had watched people make it in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a diner in Tennessee. Sometimes the calculation was right, sometimes it was not. What he knew for certain was that it cost something every single time, and that the cost was always higher than it should have been. He looked across the table at Bull Maddox. Bull was 58 years old, built like a man who had spent 3 decades working with his hands, forearms like bridge cables, a face that had seen its share of disagreements and retained the record. Bull met Cole's eyes and said nothing. He did not need to. 40 minutes after Victor arrived, Alara brought his check. She set it at the far edge of the table and stepped back, already turning toward her other tables. Victor reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. Not impulsively, not with the blind force of someone acting on instinct. With the deliberate, measured quality of a man who had done this kind of thing before and understood precisely how much force was required to make a point without creating something that could not be managed afterward. Alara stopped. Every muscle in her body locked simultaneously. The dog tags pressed against her sternum. She felt the weight of them, the temperature of the metal, and she looked down at his hand on her wrist and then looked up at his face. "Please let go of me." Her voice was clear and quiet and completely steady. She had learned years ago in a self-defense class she had taken during Marcus's first deployment that the voice was the first thing you had to maintain, that your voice was the signal your whole nervous system took its instruction from. Victor did not let go. He said something to his companion, something low and easy, pitched as casual amusement. And when she pulled her arm back, he did the thing that changed everything in that room. He slapped her, not hard enough to put her down, not hard enough to leave a mark that would last more than a day, but hard enough to make a sound that cut through every conversation in Harlow's diner like something clean and irreversible. Hard enough that the family at the table near the window went completely silent. Hard enough that a child at the counter looked up from her milkshake with wide, uncertain eyes. Hard enough that Rose made a sound behind the counter, a short, involuntary intake of breath that she immediately tried to contain. The diner went quiet. Not careful. Quiet. The real kind, the kind that contains no calculation at all, the kind that happens when something occurs that nobody in a room was prepared for. Alara stood with one hand raised to her face, her eyes wide, processing what had just happened with the half-second lag that the mind always brings to the truly unexpected. She could hear the ceiling fan. She could hear a truck out on Route 9. And then 6 chairs moved back from the corner booth simultaneously. Not fast, not scrambled. With the specific, unhurried deliberateness of men who have spent years learning the difference between reaction and response, and who long ago chose which one they would operate from. Cole Hargrove stood first. He was 61 years old and 5 feet 10 inches tall, and built lean in the way of a man who had always been lean and had gotten more so as the years accumulated. He did not stand the way men stand in the movies, with the theatrical sizing up that announces itself across a room. He stood the way men stand who have already decided what they are going to do and have no remaining interest in being persuaded otherwise. He walked toward Victor Driscoll's table without hurrying. The 5 men behind him spread through the room without instruction, not surrounding the table in any aggressive geometry, just becoming present at points that could not be ignored. Bull Maddox to Victor's left, his mechanic's hands visible and still at his sides. Reverend Silas Wick, 64 years old with a gray beard, in the posture of a man who had served as an army chaplain and had never quite stopped carrying himself like a soldier positioned near the edge of the booth. Tanner Briggs to Cole's right eyes, moving steadily through the room. Wesley Pruitt and Cormac Hayes in the natural sight lines, visible and unhurried. They said nothing. They were simply there. Victor looked up. He looked at Cole stopped 2 feet from his table. He looked at the 5 other men at various positions around the room. He looked at the phones that had appeared in the hands of people at nearby table screens already lit. He looked at Rose Keating behind the counter, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low and completely steady voice to someone on the other end of the line. The smile was not fully in place. Cole looked at Victor Driscoll for a long moment without speaking, letting the silence carry the weight it was capable of carrying when occupied correctly. Then he spoke in a voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest tables. You just put your hands on a pregnant woman in front of witnesses. That was all. No raised voice, no performance. A statement of fact delivered with the precision of a man who understood that the facts in this particular moment were entirely sufficient on their own. Victor's jaw tightened. You need to walk away, old man. The edge in his voice was the edge of a man unaccustomed to needing to use it, which made it less sharp rather than more. Cole did not move. We'll wait for the police, he said. Rose was still on the phone. Deputy Oakes was on his way. Victor Driscoll stood up slowly, and when he stood, he found himself looking at a room that had become something entirely different from the room he had walked into 45 minutes ago. 4 phones recording. A diner full of people who had been looking at their plates and were now looking directly at him. Rose Keating on the phone, her voice steady, her eyes on his face. 6 men who were not going anywhere. Victor understood arithmetic. It was how he had built everything he had by running the numbers faster than the other people in the room and acting before they finished. He smoothed his jacket. He arranged his expression into something that resembled controlled inconvenience. He looked at Cole. This isn't over, he said, quiet enough that only Cole could hear. Then he walked out of Harlow's diner, his 2 men falling in behind him, got into the black Mercedes without looking back and drove away. The diner exhaled. Alara was near the counter, one hand still at her cheek. Rose was beside her arm around her shoulders, the ice already coming wrapped in a clean towel. Rose knowing without being asked exactly what was needed. Tanner Briggs had reached her first stopping at a respectful distance, asking if she needed a doctor. She shook her head. Her hand was pressed to her face, and her voice when she spoke was steady. I'm okay, she said. She sat at the counter and pressed the ice to her cheek and worked on organizing her breathing into something even. Rose hovered close. The other customers watched with the kind of concern that knows what it feels but is uncertain how to act. Cole Hargrove came to stand nearby, not crowding, not performing, just present in the particular way some people know how to be present, occupying their own space without trying to occupy anyone else's. You should sit a while, he said quietly. Take your time. There was something in his voice she recognized without yet having a name for it. Something that came from the far side of hard experience. A gentleness that had been arrived at rather than inherited. She looked up at him. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Outside on Route 9, Victor Driscoll's Mercedes was already half a mile away, already running its calculations. Inside Harlow's diner, the ceiling fan turned, and the afternoon light came through the windows at a different angle than it had before. And the coffee was warm, and everything in the room had shifted in some way that could not be precisely named but was entirely real. Alara pressed the ice to her face and held herself together the way she had been holding herself together for 14 months. And from somewhere beneath the shock and the grief and the exhaustion, something that was not yet hope but contained hope's basic materials began to move in her chest. Cole Hargrove stood nearby and said nothing and watched the door Victor had walked out of with the patient stillness of a man who had already decided what came next and was simply waiting for the correct moment to begin. His eyes kept returning to the dog tags at her collar. Deputy Oakes arrived 17 minutes after Rose made the call. He was 20 years younger than Chief Brennan and carried himself with the directness of someone who had not yet learned to calibrate his professional instincts to the social infrastructure of the county. He came through the door, assessed the room, noted Alara at the counter with the compress against her face, and started doing his job before he had fully crossed the threshold. Chief Brennan arrived 4 minutes later. The chief was a careful man in all the ways that mattered and several of the ways that did not. 11 years running the Millhaven department had given him a finely developed sense of which situations required speed and which required consideration. And the difficulty with this particular situation was that it required both at once. He knew Victor Driscoll the way everyone in Millhaven law enforcement knew Victor Driscoll, the name on the donor plaque in the station lobby, the lawyer's number in his phone. He came through the door, and his face was carefully neutral in a way that communicated something to everyone in the room who knew how to read it. Deputy Oakes had already begun. He pulled a chair close to the counter and sat at Alara's level rather than standing over her, a small choice that was not a small thing. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened today?" Alara lowered the compress. She had composed herself in the minutes since Victor left. Not the brittle composure of someone barely holding together, but the deliberate kind, the composure of a person who has decided it is the most powerful tool currently available and is using it with full intention. She told him everything. Calm, sequential, factual, the return stakes, the comments, the grip on her wrist, her clear request to be released, the slap. She gave him the events in the order they occurred without editorializing and without the kind of emotional presentation that can make a factual account easier to characterize as something else. She had been a waitress for 8 years and a Marine's wife for 9, and she understood that the way you told a thing shaped how the thing was received. Deputy Oakes wrote it all down. Then he spoke to the customers who had recorded video. 4 of them from 3 different tables, and between them they had captured the incident from angles that complemented each other with uncomfortable completeness. Victor's hand closing on Alara's wrist, her clear and audible request to be released. The slap, the timestamp on each recording placed all of it within 40 seconds. Oakes watched the footage with the expression of a man absorbing something more unambiguous than he had anticipated. Chief Brennan stood at the edge of the room with his notebook open and his pen not moving. "We'll need to speak with Mr. Driscoll," Oakes said, using the formal address with the precision of someone choosing words for a record. "I'll handle that," Brennan said. Oakes looked at him for a moment, nodded. It was not a fully satisfied nod. Before they left, Oakes turned to Cole, who had remained near the counter with his 5 brothers, arranged quietly through the room. "You and your associates," Oakes said. "You didn't touch him." "No, sir," Cole said. "We stood there and waited for you." Oakes looked at him with the assessment of someone determining whether the steadiness in front of him was genuine. He appeared to conclude that it was. "Keep it that way," he said, and then he and Brennan walked out. The diner returned to itself slowly. Customers finished meals that had gone cold. The lunch rush moved toward its natural end. But the quality of the quiet was different from any ordinary afternoon quiet. There was something in it that people felt without being able to name, an invisible thread running between the counter where Alara sat and the corner booth where the Iron Ridge men had returned to their coffee. Rose stayed near Alara without making a performance of the staying. Fresh coffee, a slice of pie nobody asked for. The practiced presence of a woman who had learned how to be with someone without making them feel managed. Cole came to the counter after a while. He waited until the room had settled and the acute shock had moved through its first phase and left something more considered in its place. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I ask you something?" Alara looked up. His eyes were the same gray-blue she had noticed when she first took their order, clear and direct without pressure. "Yes, sir," he hesitated. Not from uncertainty, she thought, but from care, making sure of the words before committing them. "Those tags," he said, nodding toward her collar. "May I ask whose they are?" Her hand went to them through her shirt. She held them a moment, feeling the edges of the stamped letters. "My husband," she said. "Sergeant Marcus James Calloway. Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. He passed away 14 months ago." Cole went still. It was not ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of a person who has just received information that is reorganizing something significant behind their eyes, something that has been arranged a certain way for a long time and is now being rearranged. Tanner Briggs looked over from the corner booth. So did Bull Maddox. They had been listening with the peripheral attention of men trained to monitor everything in any room they occupied. Cole's voice, when it came, was barely above a conversational level. "Marcus Calloway," he said, "2nd Battalion, 7th Marines." Ilara's eyes widened. Yes, did you know him? Cole was quiet long enough for the silence itself to become a kind of answer. Behind him, the five other riders had gone completely still. Ma'am Cole said slowly on November 23rd, 2007, outside Fallujah, the Humvee I was riding in struck an IED. The vehicle rolled and caught fire. I was trapped inside. Ilara did not move. Corporal Marcus Calloway was on foot patrol approximately 200 meters away. Cole continued. He ran into the kill zone while rounds were still incoming. He pulled me out of that burning vehicle. He got me clear and checked that I was breathing before he went back to his unit. The words entered the room with a weight disproportionate to their syllables. I was medevaced to a hospital in Germany. Spent 3 weeks there with burns and shrapnel. By the time I was stable enough to ask about the men who helped me, Corporal Calloway had rotated back to the States. I lost the thread. He paused. I have been looking for Marcus Calloway for 17 years. Ilara stared at him. The compress had been forgotten in her hand. He never told me, she whispered. Cole's eyes were wet, and he made no effort to manage it. That sounds like him, he said. That sounds exactly like the man who did what he did. And Ilara Calloway, who had not cried. Not at the funeral, not through the long gray months of working doubles and paying bills and lying awake in a studio apartment staring at a water-stained ceiling. Who had decided in the wreckage of the first weeks that grief was a place she could visit but not live in because living there meant not surviving, and she had a child coming and she could not afford not to survive? She cried. Not from the slap, not from Victor Driscoll or the bills or the 10 days left before the eviction. She cried because for the first time since the deputy had knocked on her door 14 months ago, she felt something she had not permitted herself to feel. Not Marcus's absence, but his presence. As if he had reached across 17 years and 14 months simultaneously and set his hand on the specific situation she was standing in the middle of and said, I thought of this too. I prepared for this too. Rose wrapped an arm around her shoulders and held her without speaking. Cole stood nearby and did not fill the silence with anything because he understood that certain silences needed to contain nothing but themselves. In the corner booth, 5 men sat without speaking. Tanner Briggs was looking at the table surface with an expression doing considerable interior work. Bull Maddox was looking at Ilara with the attention of a man for whom something had just clarified. Reverend Silas Wick had his eyes closed. Some debts. Cole thought, watching the woman crying at the counter while afternoon light moved through the windows of a diner in Tennessee, do not expire. They do not expire when the person you owe them to is gone. They do not expire when years pass, when the world moves on, when you carry the weight of them long enough to stop feeling it as weight. They simply wait. They wait for the moment when payment is possible, and then that moment arrives, and it looks nothing like what you imagined, and it looks exactly like what it needed to look like. Cole Raymond Hargrove had walked into a diner on Route 9 in Millhaven, Tennessee, on a Wednesday afternoon in August, and found the widow of the man who had given him 17 extra years of life. He did not believe in coincidence. He had stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. He believed in debts, and he believed that the time to pay this one had come. After Ilara had composed herself and gone to the back room at Rose's insistence, Cole returned to the corner booth and looked at his 5 brothers. We're staying, he said. Bull Maddox nodded without hesitation. How long? Long as it takes. Reverend Silas leaned forward. What are we doing, Cole? Cole thought about what he knew. A pregnant widow, 14 months into grief, 10 days from eviction, $8,000 behind on the medical bill for the child she was carrying. A woman working herself past any reasonable limit because stopping meant falling, and she could not afford to fall. A woman who had just been struck by a man who believed that money and position made consequences optional. And he thought about Marcus Calloway running 200 meters across open ground while the world was actively trying to kill everything in that space running toward the fire, because there was a man trapped inside who would not survive otherwise. We help her, Cole said, the way Marcus would have helped any of us. Quietly, practically. No speeches. We figure out what she needs and we do what needs to be done. Rose had come over while Alara was in the back room, moving with the directness of a woman who had run the calculation and arrived at a conclusion. She sat down across from Cole without being invited. "You boys serious?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Rose studied him with 32 years of accumulated instrument for assessing whether people meant what they said. "Then I'll tell you what I know," she said. She told them about the eviction notice, the $1,400, the 10 days. She told them the building had been recently acquired and that the new ownership traced through an LLC that traced through another LLC that led back to Victor Driscoll. She told them about the fertility bills, the 8,200 outstanding, the clinic approaching the end of its patients. She told them about the Honda Civic in the parking lot, the transmission going, the brake shot. "She's been carrying all of this," Rose said, "without asking a single person for anything, because that is exactly who she is." She told them about Marcus proposing in the corner booth with the ring on the whipped cream. She told them about the conversation before his second deployment, the clinic, the decision Alara had made in January when something inside her had shifted enough to let her move toward the future instead of away from it. The IVF, the positive test, the particular kind of courage required to choose to bring a child into the world on the far side of the worst thing that had ever happened to you. The table was quiet when she finished. Tanner said very quietly, "Jesus." Cole sat with everything Rose had told them. Then he looked at his brothers one by one. "Bull," he said. "The car." "Already thinking about it," Bull said. "What year and make?" 2012 Honda Civic. "It's in the lot. I'll look at it tonight. Tell you what it needs." Cole looked at Wesley Pruitt, the compact, careful-eyed man who had spent 4 years as a combat medic in Iraq, in the 15 years since working with veteran families who did not know what they were entitled to. "Doc," he said, using the road name from habit. "Your contact at the VA in Nashville, the one who handles military family benefits." Dr. Patricia Nuon Wesley said, "Obstetrics in military family services. I'll call her tonight." "Reverend." Cole looked at Silas Wick. Silas straightened slightly. "The Veterans Relief Fund, we have close to 12,000 available, all designated for exactly this kind of situation." "Make it anonymous," Cole said. "Veterans Relief Fund Survivor Support. Under her door tonight if you can manage it." Silas was already reaching for his phone. "Tanner, you and I are going to spend some time with Victor Driscoll's public records. I want to understand what we're working with." Tanner's eyes sharpened with the focus of a man who had never stopped being the signals intelligence specialist he had trained to be. "Already on it," he said. Cole looked at Rose. "We'll need your help. You know this town, and you know who he's hurt." Rose's expression settled into something that had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. "Yes," she said, "I know exactly who he's hurt, and I know who's had enough." "One more thing," Cole said. "When Alara comes back out, I'm going to talk to her directly. She deserves to know what we're planning and why." Rose nodded. "She'll push back." "I know," Cole said. "We'll let her push back, and then we'll tell her the truth, and we'll let her decide." Alara came out of the back room 20 minutes later with her eyes clear and her uniform straightened in the particular composure of a person who has allowed themselves a necessary thing and then closed the door on it. She went back to work with the automatic purpose of long habit. At 7, after the dinner crowd had thinned, Cole walked back into the diner alone and asked if she would sit with him for a few minutes. She looked at Rose. Rose nodded. Alara set the coffee pot down and slid into the booth across from him. "I want to help you," Cole said. No preamble. Alara's expression closed. "I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's a debt." She looked at him. 17 years ago, Cole said, "Your husband gave me my life back. He ran into a kill zone for a man he had never met, and because of that, I got to live. I got 17 more years." He paused. "I got to see my son graduate high school before I lost him. I got to sit with my wife and say everything that needed saying before she went. I got to ride with my brothers and watch sunrises in places I never would have seen. I got to do all the small, ordinary things that add up to a life." He paused again. "Marcus gave me every bit of that, and I never got to thank him." Alara was very still. So I'm not offering charity, Cole said. I'm asking you to let me pay a debt that has been owed for 17 years to a man I can no longer pay directly. I'm asking you to let me pay it to you. The silence stretched. Outside Route 9 carried its steady traffic. Inside the diner hummed with the low sound of an evening winding down. What kind of help, Alara said. Medical, housing, your car, whatever you need to get stable, to give you some breathing room before this baby comes. I don't even know you. No, but I knew Marcus, and that's enough for me. She looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring she still wore, at the shape of the dog tags beneath her shirt. If I agree, she said, I want to know everything. No decisions made about my life without me knowing about them first. Cole nodded. Fair. And I pay back what I can when I can. If you insist. I do. Then we have a deal. She put her hand across the table and he took it, and her grip was firm in a way that said, clearly, this is a choice I am making, not something being done to me. That night after her shift ended at 11, she walked out to find Bull Maddox beside her Honda with a flashlight and a notepad. He tipped his head with the courtesy of a large man who has learned to move carefully in spaces where other people are uncertain. Hope you don't mind, ma'am. Cole asked if I could take a look with your permission. What do you find, she asked. Transmission needs replacing, Bull said, working through the assessment methodically. Brakes are gone on both axles. 2 tires are past safe. Oil change overdue. He closed the hood. You're on borrowed time here. I know, I just can't fix it right now. Bull turned to look at her. What if someone wanted to fix it as payment on a debt? She crossed her arms. She was tired and her feet hurt, and her face still carried a faint ache. How much are parts? Around $1,600. Labor is free. I don't have $1,600. Already covered. By who? By men who owe Marcus Calloway something they cannot fully repay. Bull's voice was matter of fact, the voice of a man who had organized the situation into its correct proportions and was not going to apologize for where it landed. Let us do this. Let us be what we're good at being, for you and for him. She stood in the parking lot for a moment. The August night was warm and still, and the stars over Millhaven were the kind that only appeared at a sufficient distance from city light. Okay, she said. Bull nodded. First thing tomorrow, running smooth by tomorrow evening. He walked away and she stood looking at her car, this unreliable machine she had been nursing along with prayer and avoidance, and felt something shift in her chest that she could not yet name. Thursday morning, she found the envelope under her apartment door. Plain white, no return address, her name in a steady hand on the front. Inside was a check for $12,000. The memo line read, Veterans Relief Fund Survivor Support. She sat on the edge of her bed and held it with both hands and did not move for 2 full minutes. $12,000. More money in one place than she had seen since before Marcus died. Enough to cover the back rent with room to spare. Enough to bring the fertility clinic current. Enough to breathe. She called Rose. Did you have anything to do with this? With what, honey? A check. $12,000. Veterans Relief Fund. Rose was quiet for a moment. Those Iron Ridge men, she said finally. They're doing what they said they would do. I don't understand why. Because it's what good men do, Rose said. When they see someone who needs help and they have the means, they help. Because they knew Marcus. Because they owe him something they can't give back to him directly. She paused. Because it's right, Alara. Sometimes the explanation is that simple. It feels like too much. Honey, Rose said, and her voice was gentle and direct at once. You have been carrying the weight of the world by yourself for 14 months. You are 7 months pregnant, and you have been working doubles and holding everything together on pure will. You have been so strong for so long. Let someone else help carry it for a while. Marcus would want that for you. You know he would. Alara closed her eyes. Yeah, she said. I know. She deposited the check that afternoon, paid the landlord, called the fertility clinic and brought the account current, sat in her car in the bank parking lot afterward, and gave herself 30 seconds of something close to relief, which was different from happiness, but was not nothing, and was more than she had felt in a very long time. In the diner parking lot, Bull Maddox and Cormac Hayes had her Civic up on jacks. They worked through the morning with the efficient rhythm of men who have been doing this kind of work their whole lives, a rhythm that does not require much conversation because the work itself provides enough structure. Elara brought them sandwiches at noon. "You don't have to do that," Cormac said. "You're fixing my car," she said. "The least I can do is feed you." She sat on the curb and watched them work. There was something genuinely calming in the methodical competence of people who know what they are doing and do it without drama. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. Bull set his wrench down. "Go ahead. Why are you really doing this?" He was quiet for a moment, not rushing the answer. "My brother Philip," he said finally, "killed in the Gulf War in '91. He was 23. I was 19. When he died, our family fell apart. My mother couldn't work. My father started drinking. We were weeks from losing the house. He picked up the wrench but did not immediately use it. A group of men from Philip's unit showed up one Saturday. 8 of them. Spent the whole day fixing things around the property that nobody had gotten to for a year. Left an envelope with 3 months of mortgage payments. They said it was what Philip would have wanted. They said that when brothers fall, the ones still standing take care of what's left behind." He looked at the transmission he was installing. "I swore if I ever had the chance to be that for someone else, I would be. Your husband was a Marine. He was a brother. This is what brothers do." Elara nodded without trusting herself to speak. At 5 o'clock, Wesley Pruitt arrived with a folder. "I spoke to Dr. Patricia Nuon at the Vanderbilt VA this afternoon," he said. "You qualify for full prenatal coverage through the VA health system. All remaining appointments, the delivery postpartum, at no cost." He opened the folder. "You also qualify for survivor benefits through the Department of Defense. The application was never filed." Elara stared at him. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "The system doesn't advertise," Wesley said. "And people who are grieving don't always have the capacity to navigate it. It happens more than it should." He held out the forms. "I've prepared everything. I just need your signatures." She signed with hands that were not quite steady, feeling the full weight of realizing she had been entitled to this for 14 months and had not known. That she had been stretching every dollar and working every shift because nobody had told her. $1,200 a month in survivor benefits. She read that line 3 times. Friday afternoon, Bull started the Honda. The engine turned over and caught and ran with a smoothness it had not had in over a year. He revved it once, listened, nodded with the satisfaction of a man whose diagnosis and solution had aligned precisely. Transmission's in, brakes are done, tires are good, oil's changed. She'll run well for a long time. Elara put her hand on the roof of the car on the warm metal and looked at these 2 men who had spent 2 days in a diner parking lot in August, making sure she had reliable transportation. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you." Cormac grinned. "Don't thank us. Thank the transmission." That evening in a motel room at the edge of town, Tanner Briggs had 3 county record databases running simultaneously on his laptop. Cole sat across from him, watching the picture come together. The county records clerk, a woman named June Alford, who had been in that basement office for 22 years and had watched Victor Driscoll's portfolio expand with an expression of increasing weariness, had been more cooperative than Tanner expected. She had pulled up the records with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for someone to ask. 38 properties in Millhaven County, Tanner said. Residential, mostly some commercial. All through LLCs. 6 different ones, but cross-reference the registered agents and tax IDs, and they all route to the same person. He turned the laptop. He controls close to 45% of the rental housing market in this county. Cole studied the screen. How many tenants know who actually owns their building? Maybe half. The rest are dealing with management companies that don't surface the parent ownership. He's a slum lord with connections, Cole said. That's a specific kind of dangerous. There's more. 3 commercial properties with code violations going back years cited and closed without documentation of repair. 2 residential buildings with repeated tenant complaints reviewed by a deputy inspector who received campaign donations from a Driscoll-affiliated PAC in the 6 months before each review. Cole looked at him. It would take a journalist to properly source all of this, Tanner said. But the thread is there. Anyone who wants to pull it can pull it. Cole thought about Jennifer Caldwell at the Tennessee Tribune. He had known her for 4 years. She was thorough, and she understood what accountability journalism was for. He would call her, but not yet. He was watching something first. He had been watching Alara Calloway for 3 days, watching the particular process of a woman who has been carrying everything alone for too long, beginning to understand that she does not have to. It was not a fast process, and it was not a comfortable one for someone built the way she was built. But it was happening. He could see it in each acceptance, the car repair, the medical appointment, the check under the door. Each one a small renegotiation of the terms she had set for herself in the first terrible months after Marcus died. He was watching her move, not passively, not as someone waiting to be saved, as someone in the process of deciding that waiting was not the correct posture. He had seen it when she came to him at the booth and shook his hand with that firm grip and said, "I want to know everything." He was seeing it again on Friday morning. On Friday morning, Alara called Deputy Oaks herself. Cole had not asked her to do this. Rose had not organized it. Alara had made the call at 8 o'clock from the counter of Harlow's Diner before her shift, with a notepad in front of her on which she had written the timeline in clear chronological order. She had received the original eviction notice 10 days earlier. She had paid the back rent on Thursday. The new eviction notice citing the building's new ownership and termination of month-to-month tenancy had arrived less than 24 hours after her payment cleared. She laid this out for Deputy Oaks the same way she had given him her statement, factual, sequential, without the kind of emotional presentation that makes facts easier to dismiss. Retaliatory eviction, she told him. I paid everything I owed. The notice came 18 hours later. I have the payment confirmation and I have the notice. I can send you both. Oaks listened, asked questions, said the words retaliatory eviction with the care of someone who understood their legal weight. That evening, Alara sat down with Rose in the empty diner after closing and asked a direct question. Who else has he hurt, Rose? Who has he done this to? Before Rose looked at her for a moment, not with surprise, with something closer to recognition and something adjacent to relief. I know 4 women off the top of my head, Rose said, and business owners, and families he's pushed out of rental properties. The question is, who's willing to say so publicly? Find out who's willing, Alara said. Don't tell them what to do. Just ask. Rose nodded slowly. Cole had been watching from across the diner. He said nothing, but something in him settled quiet and certain. This was not a woman waiting for 6 strangers to fix her life. This was a woman who had been knocked sideways by things that would have knocked anyone sideways, who had taken the available help because she was smart enough to know that pride was not a substitute for survival, and who was now doing what she had always been capable of doing, moving forward with full intention. That night, alone in her apartment for the first time in days, Alara opened Marcus's journal. It had been on the nightstand for 14 months. She had moved it from their house to the apartment because she could not leave it behind, and she had placed it beside his photograph, and she had looked at it every morning and every night, and had not opened it because opening it meant finishing something she was not yet ready to finish. She sat on her bed with her hand on the cover. The baby moved against her palm. She opened it. She read from the beginning. The entries from basic training, the voice of a young man that was earnest and sometimes funny, the handwriting more urgent than it would later become. His first deployment, the careful language of someone who did not want to write anything frightening and did not always succeed. The entry from the day they met at the VA clinic in 2009, where she had been working as a clinic administrator, and he had come in for a follow-up and caught her attention by holding the door for everyone behind him without appearing to think about it. August the 12th, 2009. Met a woman today, Alara. She works at the front desk. She smiled at me and I forgot what I was there for. I think I might find a reason to go back next week. She laughed through tears that had started without her noticing. She kept reading. Their courtship across the entries of 2009 and 10. The proposal entry, April 14th, 2010, which began simply, she said yes. And she said it before I finished asking, which I think means I did something right. She kept reading. January 10th, 2023. Elar and I made a decision tonight. We're going through with the freezing. I've been putting it off, but with the second deployment coming, we need to do this. I don't like thinking about the worst case. I hope she never needs it. But if something happens and she wants a piece of what we had, what we built together, I want her to have it. I want her to have the choice. That feels important, to give her a choice. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She turned to the last entry. June 10th, 2023, 5 days before the accident. Life is good right now. Simple. Exactly what I used to think about when I was overseas and things were bad. Coming home to this town and this woman and this ordinary, unremarkable, completely perfect life. I think about Sergeant Hargrove sometimes, the man from Fallujah. I never found out what happened to him, whether he made it through those weeks in Germany. I hope he made it home. I hope wherever he is, he got his simple life. He deserved it. He deserved every bit of it. Alara sat with the journal closed against her chest for a long time. The apartment was quiet around her. Outside Millhaven moved through its ordinary Friday night cars on Route 9, the distant sound of a neighbor's television. A town that did not know it was inside a story. He knew, she said to the empty room. He thought about you. 5 days before he died, he thought about you and hoped you were all right. She was not speaking to anyone who could hear her yet. She was speaking to the apartment and to the photograph on the nightstand, and to the presence she could still feel in the room when things were quiet enough to let it be felt. Sergeant Hargrove made it home, Marcus, she said. He got a simple life. And then he came back. The baby kicked strong and deliberate, exactly as if he understood the timing. She put her hand on her belly and held it there. Okay, she said, to both of them, I hear you. She did not know yet what the next days would bring. She did not know that Victor Driscoll was already in motion, that the three-part retaliation he had planned was already underway, that the full weight of what it meant to embarrass a man like him in a room full of witnesses would arrive at her door within 48 hours. She did not know that she would face it differently than she would have faced it 2 weeks ago, because something in her had shifted enough to let her face it as herself, rather than as someone simply trying not to fall. What she knew, sitting in her apartment on a Friday night with her husband's journal in her hands and his child moving steadily inside her, was this: she was not alone. She had not been alone since 6 chairs moved back from a corner booth on a Wednesday afternoon in August, and she was done pretending otherwise. The videos crossed 500,000 combined views on Saturday morning. Elara did not watch the number. She was at Harlow's working the breakfast shift when Rose showed her the phone 4 uploads from 4 different angles, the kind of footage that carried the particular quality of undeniability that comes from multiple independent sources showing the same thing without coordination. A man in a charcoal gray suit reaching across a table, a woman's clear request to be released. The slap. 6 men standing from a corner booth with the unhurried deliberateness of people who had made a decision. Rose set the phone face down on the counter. People are angry, she said. Elara refilled the coffee pot and went back to her tables. She had not asked for any of this. She had not uploaded anything or spoken to any reporters or done anything to push what had happened at Harlow's Diner beyond the 4 walls it had happened in. Other people had made those decisions for customers who had recorded what they saw and determined that the world should see it too. She understood their reasoning without being fully certain how she felt about being at the center of what they had set in motion. What she felt mostly was tired, in the way of someone who has been maintaining vigilance for long enough that the vigilance has become indistinguishable from ordinary consciousness, so that even the things that should feel like relief are filtered through the habit of waiting for what comes next. What came next arrived on Saturday afternoon. She came home from her shift to find a notice on her apartment door. Not the eviction notice she had paid her way out of. A new one dated that morning, citing the termination of month-to-month tenancy by the new property owner effective in 72 hours. She stood in the hallway and read it twice. She had paid the back rent on Thursday. The payment had cleared by noon. This notice had been generated and delivered within 24 hours of that clearing, which was not coincidence and was not administrative timing and was not anything other than what it was. She called her landlord. He sounded genuinely sorry, which she believed because he was not the problem. He was a man caught between his own discomfort and the arithmetic of who owned the building now. "I'm sorry, Ms. Calloway. Mr. Driscoll acquired the property Thursday evening. He's within his rights to terminate month-to-month leases with proper notice. I paid everything I owed." "I know. I'll refund the full payment. But the notice stands. I'm sorry." She hung up and sat down on the hallway floor because her legs had decided to make that choice on her behalf, and she was too tired to overrule them. She sat with her back against the wall and her hands on her belly and let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 60 seconds. Then she called Rose. "He's retaliating," Rose said immediately, anger sharp in her voice. "That man is retaliating because you spoke up and because those videos showed exactly who he is. What do I do?" "You call Cole Hargrove. That is exactly what you do." Ilara was quiet for a moment. She had accepted the money and the car repair and the VA appointment and told herself each time that she was accepting help, not dependency, and that the difference was real and she understood it. But this felt different. This felt like calling someone every time the world hit her and the world was not going to stop hitting her. Ilara Rose said, her voice shifting to something quieter and more direct. "Marcus isn't here, but his brothers are. You are not being weak. You are using the resources available to you because you are a smart woman with a child to protect and 72 hours to figure out where you are going to live. Call Cole." Ilara looked at the notice in her hand. She called Cole. He answered on the second ring, his voice completely alert. "He's evicting me," she said. "Victor bought the building and he's giving me 72 hours. I paid the rent yesterday and he filed this notice this morning." 3 seconds of silence. "Where are you right now?" "Outside my apartment." "Stay there. I'm coming." He arrived in 20 minutes with all 5 of his brothers. They filled her small apartment in a way that made it feel occupied and claimed as if their presence had changed the room's properties. She explained the situation. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, his jaw was set in the way she had come to read over the past 3 days as the external sign of a fast internal process arriving at conclusions. "Retaliatory eviction," he said. "The law has a name for it because it happens enough to need one. But proving it in court takes time you don't have." He looked at Reverend Silas. "The apartment." Silas Wick nodded before Cole finished the word. "It's been empty 2 months. 2 bedrooms clean, everything working. Attached to the church property." Ilara began to speak. "It is not charity," Silas said with the gentle preemptive precision of a man who has heard this objection enough times to know its shape in advance. "We charge rent, whatever you can manage. A real arrangement with real terms. But it is available now, and it is safe, and it is not connected to anything Victor Driscoll owns or can reach." She looked around her apartment. The water stain, the crack in the plaster, the 2 small curtains, the nightstand with Marcus's photograph, and the journal she had finally opened. 72 hours, she said. "We move you this weekend," Bull said simply. "Truck and van. Everything you own in one trip, I'd imagine." She did not have enough left to argue with logistics delivered at that level of practical certainty. "Okay," she said. That afternoon, while Ilara worked her dinner shift, the Iron Riders moved her belongings to the church apartment. 3 hours. Everything she owned fit in Bull's truck and Cormac's van, with room remaining, which was a fact about her circumstances that she did not examine too closely. They set up her bed with the headboard against the wall with the best morning light, because Tanner had asked Rose which way Ilara preferred to sleep. They placed Marcus's photograph on the nightstand. They arranged the kitchen with functional logic. Reverend Silas left a coffee maker on the counter and a note that said simply, "Welcome home." Cole was sitting in the small living room when Ilara arrived after her shift. She walked through the rooms, the bedroom with its morning light, the kitchen laid out sensibly, the small second room that was currently empty and would not be for long, the window in the living room looking out over a garden where someone had planted roses still holding their late summer color. "It's perfect," she said. "It's yours as long as you need it," Cole said. "No conditions beyond what you can afford." She turned to look at him. This man who had walked into her diner 4 days ago and changed the geometry of her situation in a direction she had not anticipated. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. "All of it." Cole sat down in the chair near the window, and she sat on the small couch, and the lamp threw warm light across the room. "I lost my son," Cole said. "Daniel, 19 years old, Fallujah, 2007. Different unit from mine, different day. I was still in Germany when they told me." Elara was very still. "I was alive because Marcus pulled me out of that vehicle," Cole said. "And my son died 8 weeks later in the same city while I was in a hospital bed in another country." He looked at his hands. "For a long time, I couldn't make those two things fit together. I was alive because a man saved me, and my son was dead, and I wasn't there. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't resolve." He was quiet for a moment. "The Iron Riders gave me a reason to keep moving," he said. "Brothers when mine were gone. But I spent 17 years wondering why I was the one who got to live. What Marcus running toward that fire was supposed to mean." He looked up at her. "And then I walked into your diner and saw those dog tags." He paused. "I think Marcus didn't save me for me. I think he saved me so I could be here for this. For you. For his son. So that when this specific moment came, there would be someone who understood what was owed and could pay it." Elara felt the tears come and let them. She had been crying more in the past 4 days than in the 14 months before them, and she had decided to let it mean what it meant. She crossed the room and put her arms around him. Cole went still for a moment with the surprise of it. Then he put his arms around her carefully, the embrace of someone holding something that matters and afraid of holding it wrong. "Thank you," she said, "for being here, for all of it." "Always," Cole said, "for as long as you need us." Victor Driscoll's lawyer called Cole on Monday morning. Robert Hale identified himself, said his client was interested in resolving the situation amicably, expressed regret for the incident, mentioned a possible financial settlement. Cole listened to all of it with the patience of a man who has been listening to people say things that do not mean what they appear to mean for 61 years. "What does your client want in exchange?" Cole said. "The footage," Hale said. "Any public statements about Mr. Driscoll's business practices. An agreement to let the matter conclude." Cole said, "Tell your client the footage belongs to 4 private citizens who uploaded it of their own choice, and I have no authority over it. Tell him that Elara Calloway will make her own decisions about any settlement. And tell him that if he takes any further action against her, against Harlow's Diner, or against anyone who stood up in that room on Wednesday, the footage will be the least of his concerns. Mr. Hargrove, I strongly advise you to consider." "I'm done with the call," Cole said. He hung up. Tanner looked up from his laptop. He offered a settlement. Cole set the phone down. "Which means he's scared. Which means the pressure is working," Tanner said. "And which means he's going to try something else." The something else arrived Monday afternoon in 2 simultaneous moves. A county health inspector came to Harlow's Diner at 2 o'clock with a clipboard and cited 6 violations. All minor. All the kind of thing that accumulates in a working kitchen over time and is typically addressed with a correction notice. Under different circumstances, unremarkable. Under these circumstances, with this timing, they were a message in the language of bureaucratic harassment. Rose called Cole from the kitchen, controlled fury in her voice. "He's coming after the diner now." "How much to fix everything on the list?" Cole said. 2,000, maybe 2,500 with the equipment adjustment. I'll cover it." "Cole, watch me. Get Eddie started on whatever can be done today." He arrived in 40 minutes with Cormac Hayes, whose electrician's license covered 2 of the 6 violations, and spent the afternoon working through the list with methodical efficiency. The second move arrived the same afternoon. Alara's insurance company called to inform her that a claim had been filed by someone alleging injury at Harlow's Diner during the incident on Wednesday. The claim was specific about date and general circumstances and entirely fabricated in every detail that mattered. Cole called Jennifer Caldwell at the Tennessee Tribune that evening. "Jennifer," he said, "I have a story for you." She had been working the initial incident for 4 days and had heard enough to understand that what she had was larger than a single event in a diner. "I'm listening." Cole told her everything. The incident, the retaliatory eviction filed within 24 hours of the rent payment clearing, the health inspection arriving Monday, the fraudulent insurance claim the same afternoon, the property records showing 45% of the county rental market running through LLCs tracing to one man. He told her about Alara, about Marcus, about the IVF, and the 14 months of doubles and the dog tags she wore every shift. He told her about Fallujah. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Send me everything you have," she said. "Documents, the eviction timeline, the inspection notice, all of it." "One more thing," Cole said. "4 women Rose has been in contact with. Their own experiences with Victor Driscoll. They're ready to talk." Another silence. "Cole," she said, "this isn't a diner story anymore." "No," he said, "it isn't." He sent everything that night. The property records, the eviction timeline with timestamps, the inspection notice, the insurance claim documentation, the code violations that had sat unaddressed on Victor's properties for years. Tuesday morning, 4 women walked into the Millhaven Police Department and filed formal reports. Bryn Whitfield, a kindergarten teacher who had been purchasing a car at Victor's dealership in 2021 when he followed her to the parking lot after the sale and said things she had reported to the dealership manager and been told would be handled internally, after which nothing happened. Amanda Lyle, a bank teller cornered briefly in a parking structure in 2022 at an event where both were present, who had spent 3 years telling herself it was ambiguous and had finally decided it was not. Cassandra Pruitt, a paralegal who had worked briefly for a firm doing contract work for one of Victor's LLCs and had documentation. Nora Webb, a waitress at a diner in the next county who had been receiving unwanted contact from Victor for the better part of a year. None of them had been organized. None had received a call from Rose or Cole coordinating their actions. They had each watched the footage from Harlow's Diner and made their own private calculation, which was the same calculation. If she could stand up and say it happened, so could they. Chief Brennan received all 4 reports in a 2-hour window. He was looking at a situation that the tools he had historically applied to things involving Victor Driscoll could no longer manage. The footage was too widespread, the reports too numerous, the timeline too clear. He called the county prosecutor before noon. "We have a problem," he said. The Tennessee Tribune published Jennifer Caldwell's story on Wednesday morning. The headline read, "Millhaven developer accused of assaulting pregnant military widow, retaliating against supporters, facing multiple harassment allegations." The story was thorough in the way that thoroughness becomes its own argument. It laid out the incident with documentation and sourced accounts. It laid out the retaliatory eviction with timestamp evidence. It laid out the health inspection and the fraudulent insurance claim in their timeline context. It quoted the 4 women by name, each describing what had happened to them in their own words. It quoted the property records. It quoted Rose on the health inspection. It included 2 paragraphs on Marcus Calloway, his service record, the IVF, Alara's 14 months of double shifts, the dog tags she wore every day. It did not quote Cole Hargrove by name. He had asked Jennifer to leave him out of it, and she had, because the story did not need him to be complete. Victor Driscoll woke Wednesday to find his face associated with that headline on the front page of the most widely read newspaper in Tennessee. His phone began ringing at 7 and did not stop. 2 of his largest business partners issued statements before noon. One used the phrase, "severing ties." A county contract held by his logistics firm was placed under administrative review. Protesters appeared outside the car dealership by early afternoon, small in number, visible on the evening news. His wife Patricia called her sister in Knoxville and said she needed somewhere to stay. Ilara read the story at the counter of Harlow's diner during her break. The paper spread flat, her coffee going cold beside it. She read it twice, sat with it afterward with her hands on the table looking at the newsprint. Rose came to stand beside her. "Honey, I'm okay," Ilara said. She looked up. "I'm really okay." She was, not in the uncomplicated way of someone for whom everything had resolved because everything had not resolved, and the road ahead was still long, but okay in the way of someone who has found solid ground after a long time in water, who understands the difference between standing and floating, and has chosen standing. She folded the paper, finished her coffee, and went back to work. The trial was set for the third week of October. The county prosecutor had moved with unusual speed because there were 4 recorded angles of the incident and 4 separate harassment reports from 4 separate women and a story that had been picked up nationally, and the arithmetic of what a trial would look like versus what declining to pursue charges would look like had resolved with uncommon clarity. Victor's lawyer entered a not guilty plea and announced vigorous contestation. Robert Hale was skilled and understood that the footage could not be suppressed and the witnesses could not be individually discredited, which meant his strategy would need to operate at the level of context and characterization. Cole called Ilara the evening after the arraignment. "How are you doing?" She was in the chair by the living room window looking out at the rose garden in the early autumn dark. "I'm all right," she said. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to say on the stand. You don't have to decide that now." "I know, but I keep thinking about it anyway." She paused. "I want to say the true things, not the things that make me sound like a victim, the things that are actually true. Those can be the same thing," Cole said. "I know, I'm figuring out how to make them be the same." The trial began on a Tuesday in the third week of October. The courthouse was old, with high ceilings and wooden benches that held the weight of a century of decisions made inside them. It was full. Media on the courthouse steps. People who had driven from other counties to sit in the back rows because the story had grown large enough to pull witnesses from a distance. The 4 women sat in the gallery together. Bryn Whitfield, Amanda Lyle, Cassandra Pruitt, Nora Webb. They had not known each other before this and had become something in the weeks of preparation that was not quite friendship and not quite alliance, but was the specific bond that forms between people who have decided that the same thing matters. Deputy Oakes sat in the second row. He had filed his report fully and without adjustment toward administrative convenience, and he sat there with the posture of a man who had done his job and was prepared to testify to it. Cole and all 5 Iron Riders occupied the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecutor's table. They arrived together and sat without making any announcement of themselves and did not speak to the media on the steps. Ilara walked in with Rose beside her. She was 8 months pregnant and moved with the deliberate care that late pregnancy requires, each step considered. She wore a simple dark blue dress, her hair down Marcus's dog tags beneath her collar, where only she could feel them. She sat at the prosecutor's table and looked straight ahead. The prosecution's case was built on incontrovertible visual evidence and presented with the directness such evidence permits. The prosecutor, Claire Abernathy, who had been in the county office for 12 years and had learned to construct arguments simple enough to be clear and thorough enough to be unanswerable, played the footage first. All 4 angles, twice, without commentary. She let the courtroom absorb what the footage showed. Then she called witnesses, the 4 customers who had recorded it. Rose Keating, who testified about the health inspection and the fraudulent insurance claim with the compressed and carefully managed anger of a woman who had been keeping her composure in public for 30 years and had decided this occasion warranted a truthful account. Deputy Oakes, who described the retaliatory eviction timeline with documentary precision. Then she called the 4 women. Each testified briefly, clearly, without embellishment, describing what had happened to them in language that was factual rather than dramatic, because each had understood in her own way that the facts required no performance to be sufficient. On the second day, Claire Abernathy called Ilara Calloway. Alara walked to the witness stand with the deliberate composure of a woman who has decided that every action she takes in this room will be undertaken with full intention. She placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth. Ms. Calloway, Abernathy said, "Can you tell the court what happened at Harlow's Diner on the 14th of August?" Alara told it. She had been rehearsing the telling for weeks, not to make it more persuasive, but to make it more precise, to find the language that corresponded most accurately to what had actually occurred rather than to what it had felt like. She described the return stakes in sequence, the comments, the grip on her wrist, her request to be released, the slap, without raising her voice, without the emotional presentation that makes factual accounts easier to characterize as something other than testimony. "Why didn't you respond more forcefully when he first grabbed your wrist?" Abernathy asked. "I am 7 months pregnant," Alara said. "He is a man with significant resources and connections in a town where I work. I asked him to let go of me. That was what I had available to me in that moment." What changed? Alara looked at the gallery, at the front row, at Cole Hargrove in the center with his gray-blue eyes and 17 years of debt that had finally found its way home. "6 strangers stood up," she said. "Men I had never met before that afternoon. Men who had no reason to help me except that my husband had once helped one of them." She paused. "I realized that if people who owed me nothing could stand up for me, then I could stand up for myself." Robert Hale was thorough and skilled and asked questions designed to introduce ambiguity into a situation that had very little of it. He suggested Alara had been insufficiently accommodating of Victor's requests. He suggested the contact had been reflexive rather than deliberate. He suggested the subsequent business decisions had been commercially motivated. Alara answered each question with the same composure. When Hale suggested Victor had been frustrated by inadequate service, he sent the steak back 3 times with a different complaint each time, and each time the steak was cooked correctly. That is not frustration. That is a performance. When Hale suggested the contact was inadvertent, he held my wrist after I asked him to release it. He then struck me. An inadvertent action does not continue after a clear verbal request to stop. When Hale suggested the eviction was an unrelated business decision, the rent payment cleared at noon on Thursday. The acquisition filing was submitted Thursday evening. The eviction notice arrived Friday morning. I have the timestamps for all 3 events. So does the court. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 12 minutes. When they returned, the room was quiet enough to hear the ventilation in the ceiling. Victor Driscoll sat at the defense table with his face in its practiced configuration of controlled confidence, the face he had been wearing in difficult rooms for 20 years. The foreperson read the verdict: guilty of assault and battery on all counts. The room broke. Judge Patricia Morrison gavelled for order twice before the gallery settled, and even then the settling was partial, the kind of quiet that contains a great deal of movement. Victor's face had lost its configuration. It was simply the face of a man who had run his arithmetic one final time and found it completely reversed. Judge Morrison looked at Victor Driscoll. "You are sentenced to 18 months in the county correctional facility, suspended to 6 months with good behavior, a fine of $50,000 payable within 60 days, 5 years of probation with mandatory participation in a structured behavioral program, and restitution to Ms. Alara Calloway in the amount of $15,000 for demonstrated emotional distress and relocation costs." She paused. "I want to be precise about the consequences of any violation of these terms. If you approach Ms. Calloway in any capacity, if you take any action against Harlow's Diner, against the Iron Ridge MC, against any person who testified in these proceedings, or against any person who supported Ms. Calloway in any way, you will serve the full 18 months without consideration for good behavior. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." Barely audible. "Good. We're adjourned." Outside the courthouse, the October afternoon was cool and clear, with the particular light of a season finishing itself. Reporters were waiting on the steps. Alara walked out with Rose beside her, Cole a half step behind, and stopped at the top of the steps, and thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about Marcus writing in his journal 5 days before he died, "I hope Sergeant Hargrove got his simple life." She thought about Cole saying, "I think he sent us here." She thought about the four women who had walked into a police station because she had walked into a courtroom. About Deputy Oakes, who had filed his report honestly. About Jennifer Caldwell, who had taken the story seriously. About Rose, who had kept a diner open for 32 years and fed everyone who came through the door. "Justice isn't always allowed," she said. The microphones caught it. "Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just people standing up when it matters, and then other people standing up because the first people did." She paused. "My husband Marcus taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right when you're afraid anyway." She looked at the cameras. "If you are out there and someone more powerful than you has hurt you, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. Stand up, speak up, and someone will stand with you." She walked down the steps and let Rose drive her home. December came in cold. Elara worked 3 days a week now by Rose's arrangement and quiet insistence. She attended her VA appointments with Wesley, driving when the weather was bad, Rose driving when Wesley wasn't available. Victor Driscoll reported to the county correctional facility in November. His wife had finalized her departure. 3 of his residential properties were in code violation remediation proceedings. The empire had been reduced to something much closer to its actual size, stripped of the shadow that fear had cast over it for years. Rose had been negotiating quietly with a veteran-owned lending institution in Nashville since September. By November, she had the terms of buyout of the building at assessed value, the loan structured against 32 years of operating history. She signed the papers on a Tuesday in mid-November. "Harlow's Diner is mine," she told Elara. "Actually mine." Elara sat down on the nearest chair. "Don't you dare cry," Rose said. "I'm already crying. One of us needs to be functional." December 18th arrived on a Wednesday. Elara woke at 3 in the morning to contractions that were different from the Braxton Hicks of the previous weeks. Regular, deepening, unmistakable. She lay still for 90 seconds, making certain. Then she called Cole. He answered on the first ring, completely alert, as if he had been waiting. "Is it time? I think so. I think this is it." She heard him move. "We're coming." 20 minutes. It was 19 minutes when she heard the engines in the church parking lot. December in Tennessee, the first real cold of the winter, and outside her window, the headlights swept across the rose garden in the dark. She could hear them idling, 6 motorcycles, and she stood at the window looking at the lights and the breath fog rising from the riders, and understood something about what it meant that these men had come through a December night without hesitation simply because she called. Bull drove her to Vanderbilt in his truck heater, running country music, low Cole in the passenger seat, saying nothing, which was exactly right. Wesley sat behind her and monitored contractions with the practiced calm of a combat medic who had learned that calm was a skill, not a condition. The others followed on their bikes. Snow began on the interstate outside Nashville. Light and dry, the first snow of the winter falling through the truck headlights like static. Dr. Patricia Nuon was waiting at the hospital entrance. She took one look at Elara and said, "Let's have this baby." Labor lasted 14 hours. Long and hard in the way that labor is long and hard, and Elara worked through it with the same focused endurance she had been applying to difficult things for going on 2 years. The endurance of someone who has learned that the way through is always through and has stopped spending energy wishing otherwise. Rose was there. Wesley was there. Dr. Nuon was there through most of it. In the waiting room, 5 bikers sat in chairs slightly too small for them and drank coffee from a machine that did not justify the name, and waited. Cole did not sit. He paced the length of the room and back, which was something he had not done since Iraq, and he let himself do it because there are some things you cannot be still for. He had been blown up in a burning vehicle in Fallujah. He had buried his son. He had buried his wife. He had spent 17 years carrying a debt he could not pay. And standing in a hospital waiting room in Nashville on the night of December 18th, waiting for this child to be born, was the hardest thing he had done in a very long time. At 5:47 in the afternoon, Dr. Nuon came through the door. "It's a boy," she said, smiling. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, strong lungs. Both of them are doing beautifully. Cole sat down. His legs made the decision independently, and he let them sitting in one of the two small chairs and putting his head in his hands for a moment. Tanner Briggs beside him put his hand on Cole's shoulder and left it there without saying anything. After a while, the nurse said they could go in. The room was warm with the particular warmth of a place where something irreversible and important has just happened. Alara was sitting up in the bed, propped against pillows, carrying the exhaustion of 14 hours of labor, and beneath it something that was not reducible to tiredness, a quality of arrival of having come through something and landed somewhere solid. She was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, one small fist raised near his face, eyes closed. The complete absorption of a person entirely engaged in the project of existing. "Everyone," Alara said softly. "Meet Cole Marcus Calloway." The room was quiet. Cole Hargrove crossed to the edge of the bed. His eyes were wet, and he made no effort to manage it. "May I?" he said. She held the baby out to him. He took him with the deliberate care of someone who has been handed something that matters more than he has language for. The infant impossibly small in his hands, these hands that had gripped motorcycles and wrenches, and the hands of dying men held now with a steadiness that came from intention rather than confidence. "Hello, Cole," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. The baby turned slightly toward the sound without opening his eyes, the instinctive orientation of a very new person toward a voice addressing him directly. "I'm your godfather," Cole said, "and I'm going to tell you everything about your daddy. Who he was, how brave he was, how good he was, and how much he loved your mama." He paused. "You are going to know him. I promise you that." The baby made a small sound. Cole laughed, and it was a sound that was half crying, and he did not try to sort out which half was which. "Yeah, kid," he said. "I know. Long day." He passed the baby to Bull, who held him with the surprising tenderness of a man whose hands had spent 30 years bending metal, cupping the infant's head with one enormous palm, and looking at him with the expression of a man whose accounting of things has just been revised. Then to Cormac, who held the baby and looked at the ceiling for a moment with his jaw set and said nothing. Then to Wesley, who said quietly, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, Alara. He's perfect. Then to Reverend Silas, who held him with the practiced ease of a man who had performed many baptisms and said, "Welcome to the world. You come from good people." Then to Tanner, the youngest of them, who held the baby last and looked at him for a long time and said to Alara, "I'm going to tell him what his dad did. When he's old enough, I'm going to tell him about Fallujah, about what it takes to run towards something when everything in you wants to run the other way." Alara pressed her lips together and nodded. Rose held the baby after Tanner with the ease of a 70-year-old woman who had held many babies over many years and said, "Welcome home, little man. You've got a whole family waiting on you." Later, when the others had given them space and the room had settled into its late evening quiet, Cole sat in the chair beside Alara's bed. She told him about the journal entry, the last one, June 10th. She recited it from memory. "I hope Sergeant Hargrove got his simple life," she said. "That's what he wrote. 5 days before he died. He was thinking about you." Cole sat with that for a long time. He knew, Cole said finally. He looked at the baby sleeping in Alara's arms. Somehow he always knew. The baptism was held on a Sunday morning in February in Reverend Silas Wick's church in Millhaven, in a sanctuary that seated 80 and held on this morning something closer to 100. The entire congregation, the Iron Riders, the 4 women who had filed reports, Bryn Whitfield and Amanda Lyle and Cassandra Pruitt and Nora Webb, all of them together for the first time, who had found in the aftermath of the trial a connection none of them had anticipated. Deputy Oakes in civilian clothes near the back. Jennifer Caldwell from the Tribune. Rose Keating in the front row holding herself together until Silas began, and then not sitting there crying with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who has decided this moment is worth every tear. Cole Hargrove and Rose Keating stood at the baptismal font as godparents. Reverend Silas looked out at the people assembled, a gathering whose connection to each other had been forged through a sequence of events beginning in a diner on a Wednesday afternoon, and he let himself feel the full weight of it before he began. This child, he said, is born from love that outlasts death. His father served this country and gave his life in service of something larger than himself. The man his father saved came back to stand for his family when they needed standing for. He paused. That is the circle of honor. That is what it means to owe something and pay it fully. Do you, Cole Hargrove and Rose Keating, promise to guide this child in faith and in love? To tell him who his father was, and to stand for him as long as you are able? I do, Cole said. I do, Rose said. Silas poured the water. The infant squirmed, protested briefly, settled. I baptize you, Cole Marcus Calloway, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. After the service in the church hall over the potluck, the congregation had organized with the enthusiasm of people who take feeding others as a serious calling. Cole stood with a cup of coffee. I am not this boy's father, he said. His voice carried through the quiet hall. I am not family by blood. But his father gave me 17 years I would not otherwise have had. In those years I got to live, I got to ride. I got to sit with my wife and say everything that needed saying before she went. I got to watch sunrises in places I never would have seen. I got to have brothers. He paused. All of that was Marcus Calloway's gift to me, and I intend to spend whatever years I have left making sure his son knows exactly what kind of man his father was, and what it means to run toward the fire when everything in you wants to run the other way. He presented Alara with a wooden box. Inside Marcus's dog tags, a photograph of Marcus in his dress blues and a photograph of Cole in matching frames. A copy of the after-action report from Fallujah obtained through Marine Corps records with Corporal Marcus James Calloway's name in it, officially and permanently for what he had done, and a letter handwritten in Cole's steady hand. For Cole Marcus, he said, when he's old enough to understand it. August came, and with it the first anniversary. Harlow's Diner had been renovated quietly over the winter. New paint-repaired booths, a kitchen that now met every code standard without anyone needing to apply political pressure to make it so. Rose had hired 2 new waitresses. The corner booth, the large one where 6 bikers had sat on a Wednesday afternoon in August, now had a small bronze plaque on the wall beside it. In honor of Sergeant Marcus James Calloway, USMC, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, a man who ran toward the fire, a hero who never asked for thanks. Alara stood beside it on the anniversary morning, holding Cole Marcus on her hip. He was 8 months old and had recently discovered that the world was interesting and potentially edible in roughly equal measure, and he reached for the plaque with one small hand when she held him close enough. She let him touch it. That's your daddy, she told him. He was the best man I ever knew, and you are going to know him, I promise you. Baby Cole looked at the plaque with the solemn attention of a person encountering something important without yet having the vocabulary to understand why. The Iron Riders came every month, first Sunday without fail, riding in and staying the day and sometimes longer, eating at Harlow's, sitting in the corner booth, holding the baby when Alara needed her hands free, fixing whatever needed fixing with the automatic pragmatism of people who have decided that a place is theirs to care for. Victor Driscoll served 5 months and 17 days before early release. He left the county facility on a Tuesday in late April and drove east to a job at an automotive dealership in a town where his name meant nothing. Nobody in Millhaven talked about him much anymore. He had become the kind of cautionary tale that small towns generate and then absorb, useful for a while, then simply part of the history. The 4 women had each found their own path forward. Bryn Whitfield ran a Thursday evening support group at the church, 7 or 8 women in a circle in the fellowship hall each week. Amanda Lyle had been promoted to branch manager at her bank. Cassandra Pruitt opened her own paralegal practice specializing in tenant rights. Nora Webb still waited tables, but at a diner where the owner had her back, which turned out to make all the difference. On the anniversary evening, after the celebration had wound down, and Rose had locked the diner and the last guest had gone, Cole sat on his motorcycle in the parking lot and watched the Tennessee sky hold its final light. The first anniversary of a thing was always particular. The moment when whatever had happened was no longer happening, but had happened, had entered the permanent record, had become part of the landscape you carried. Ilara came out with Cole Marcus on her hip. The baby was drowsy now, leaning against her shoulder with the complete physical trust of someone who has not yet learned that the world contains anything other than safety. "You heading out?" she said. Cole nodded. "Got to get back to Nashville." He looked at the baby. "First Sunday of the month. You always are." He looked at her, at this woman who had been working a double shift, 14 months pregnant, in a diner in August, when the world put one more thing on the pile, who had taken the full weight of it and had not gone down, who had stood up and kept standing until the thing she was standing against fell down instead. "Cole," she said, "I need you to know something." She shifted the baby on her hip. "You didn't just help me financially. You didn't just fix the car and pay the bills and find me a place to live." She looked at him directly. "You gave me back the belief that Marcus mattered, that what he did meant something real, that it lived past him, that the world contains people who understand what it means to owe something and actually pay it." She took a step closer. "You gave me back my life," she said, "and I don't have words for what that means to me." Cole's throat was tight. He looked at her and at the baby and at the diner behind them, with the bronze plaque visible through the window, catching the last of the evening light. "You already thanked me," he said. "I know. I wanted to say it again." He nodded. He started his motorcycle and the engine turned over with the sound he had been hearing for 40 years, the sound that had carried him through combat and loss, and the long road back from both the sound of something still moving forward. The other 5 riders started theirs in sequence. Ilara raised Cole Marcus's hand in a wave, guiding his small fingers through the gesture. The baby watched the motorcycles with the wide-eyed focus of someone encountering something loud and interesting for the very first time. Cole raised his hand. He held it there for a moment, looking at them in the warm light of a Tennessee August evening. This young woman and this small boy, who carried his name and his father's name, and everything that ran between them across 17 years, and a burning vehicle in Fallujah, and a diner on Route 9, and all the ordinary and extraordinary things that had happened in the space between. Then he let the clutch out and rode west into the last light, his 5 brothers falling into formation, behind him the sound of 6 motorcycles receding down Route 9, until it became indistinguishable from the distance, and then became nothing at all. Ilara stood in the parking lot until she could no longer hear them. Then she went inside where Rose was waiting and sat down in the corner booth with her son in her lap and held him in the warm light of the place where everything had changed and was quiet and was home.